Welcome to Reflections, a program where we discuss values and virtues for the transformation of the individual and the society in general. I am Father George Ehusani, and I have with me my friend again in the studio, Elder Kunle Fagbemi. You're welcome.
Thank you very much, Father, for having me.
Great. Elder Kunle Fagbemi is the Executive Director of the Center for Peace Building and Socio-Economic Development. He's a peace and conflict management consultant and has been involved in the Nigerian issues for a long time. And we have been discussing these issues and pray that our discussions will one day begin to yield fruits for our country. Once again, you're welcome.
Thank you very much for having me.
A few days ago, you sent me this analysis of casualties of the ongoing conflict in Nigeria. And when I looked at the figures, Northwest, between January and June 2021, Northwest reported cases of, kidnap, 1,405 people.
Yes, sir.
North Central, 942 people. Northeast, 210. South, 140. Southwest, 169. Then Southeast, 77. Then the entire Northern Nigeria, 2,557. Then they went to deaths and kidnappings in the first half of this year. And we are getting figures 32 per day average dying, 17 kidnappers per day. I mean, I'm looking at January 958 deaths, February 879 deaths, March 875 deaths, April 1,032 deaths, May 1,045 deaths, June 1,000. What is happening, Kunle? It used to be said that the conflicts we're having all over the country is low-intensity conflicts. But low-intensity conflicts, and you're having more than 1,000 deaths a day in a country, is that still low-intensity conflict?
Painfully, Father, one of the few things I've come to learn in recent times concerning our beloved country, Nigeria, is that we are becoming very economic with the truth. And we often do not want to confront the realities, particularly when you are dealing with data. Painfully, the Nigerian state often pretend as if nothing like this is happening. And they even will want to challenge the statistics that we've just presented.
Some of the statistics come from the National Bureau of Statistics. But
painfully, that's why I said it's very painful when you now say, let us take a look at all this data. How did we come across the data that we've just reeled out? These are from news publications of the events and incidences that have occurred and reported on the pages of newspapers.
So it's in the public domain.
It's in the public domain. The next one are the monthly reports from the various security establishments, including the Nigerian police. The other data is from the United Nations Children's Education UNICEF. When you look at all this, they are clearly indicating that we have a major challenge on our hands. And when you stretch this data a little further, you'll discover that when you want to classify the nature, character, and type of the conflicts that we are going through in terms of intensity, we are already dealing with high-intensity conflicts.
So we're already beyond the low-intensity conflicts.
We are at the high-intensity conflicts by the statistics. When you take a look at the international correlates of war, we are a nation at war. It is just that we are being careful and economic with the truth for political correctness at the local and international level, not to raise the stakes and allow unnecessary international interest and attention the way we ought to be receiving it. I'll give you a good example and understanding of what we are dealing with. Under the responsibility to protect protocols of the United Nations, for having the kind of data that we are dealing with by now the United Nations rapporteurs and other protocols of the United Nations should be active in the Nigerian state. The other aspect of it is that we would have been in a position to help receive some assistance in terms of peace enforcement, peacekeeping operations within the country. But because some people, for political capital and whatsoever they are trying to achieve, they do not want us to raise the stakes.
I remember how long it took for even Boko Haram to be declared a terrorist organization. You know, it took quite some time.
A very long time.
Yes. Until today, the bandits have not been formally declared a terrorist group.
For me, I always feel a lot of pain when we use some phrases to...
Euphemisms
to describe criminal occurrences.
Yes. When
you look at what we are calling banditry in Nigeria, and you take the pains of saying, okay, let us accept that there is banditry, and it is defined within the national security strategy as revised under the incumbent administration, and even the national defense policy, you will discover one thing that is clear, that a series of crimes and criminalities are associated. And these crimes and criminalities underscore that they have a nature and character that are organized in the real sense of it,
yes.
For which, if we were doing the due diligence of labeling correctly, to help us to do criminal investigation, we would have been in a position to apprehend. And that is why it's always very difficult for some of us who develop resource kits that should help the stakeholders and practitioners to intervene correctly.
There's a saying that, you see, Jesus Christ constantly gave the demon a name in order to cast it out.
Yes.
And it is the practice of exorcists to identify the demon before casting it out.
Yes.
Because you don't cast out an amorphous demon.
No.
You deaf and dumb spirit come out.
Right.
So if you do not correctly
label
the criminality, then you have difficulty in quelling it.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. And that is why for some of us we are saying, wait a minute, we have interlocutors interfacing with some of these criminals, these individuals that they want to use the amorphous label of bandits. They interface with them as interlocutors. We see them reported to have collected some huge amounts as ransom.
Yes.
How come under the legal and policy frameworks that we operate in terms of economic intelligence, in terms of the banks reporting on a daily basis, how come we've not been able to track
the movement of these monies, these hundreds of millions?
And how come that they use the phones, even if it is the phone of the victims that they use in making those calls? We've been made to understand from the budgetary allocations and appropriation that has been done by the Nigerian National Assembly to support the security and law enforcement system that they purchase some few things. How come we have not deployed and see the evidence?
Look at the very, sadly comical dimension that it has taken, where in Kaduna, those that took the children of the Bethel Baptist School are asking for gari and rice and beans and so on and so forth. And those things are meant to be delivered somewhere. If people can take hundreds of children and are asking for bags of rice and beans and gari and so on and so forth, it means they have a camp somewhere. You're not just going to scatter rice all over the place. There is a camp somewhere. And in these days of drone technology, are we saying we are not capable, or we are unwilling to end this menace?
I will want to subscribe to the latter, that we are unwilling primarily and probably because we are dealing with organized crime, wherein some actors that are within the ambits of government,
yes,
and security law enforcement systems
agencies
are
yes,
complicit. And if we have such unfortunate scenario, then we are bound to have this kind of slow motion, unwillingness to actually activate. And that is why it's always very instructive for us to say, meanwhile, before a certain Captain Dr. Ahmad Gumi started manifesting as an interlocutor, before now we were made to understand that they could not access
where these people were.
These people were. But he has been able to show clearly
one
that
place after the other,
that they can be reached. And if they can be reached, it means that ideally some security operations ought to have been put in place, unless there is an ulterior motivation that we are yet to fully pinpoint. And this is where some of us are saying, wait a minute, what exactly is a nexus between this series of security breaches, the conflicts that are manifested and accentuated or escalated by these security breaches, our political stability as a country, our economic development, our capacity and resilience to retain ourselves as a nation state that is interested in nation building. And that is where we really need to be very careful and say to ourselves, enough is enough of the grandstanding, either by the Nigerian state in terms of the executive branch of government, or the lackluster oversight relationship of the legislature, and the impotent service delivery of the judiciary.
I mean, you have mentioned the legislature. Many Nigerians today really, really lament the disposition of the legislators who seem to just go ahead with whatever the executive does or does not do. And the checks and balances that are supposed to exist in a democracy, I think today we really don't have checks and balances.
No.
When the judiciary itself does not seem to be alive to its responsibilities, the legislators, I mean, now and again there is an ultimatum given to the president, nothing happens, and no consequences. No consequences. I mean, in any structure, in any system where there are no consequences for action or inaction, for failure or for omissions, then the system is collapsing. The system will fail. And each time we talk about the Nigerian system failing, there are some people who are angry. Now, if a system is not failing, how can you have over 1,000 deaths every month from conflicts and you say the system is still working?
The most important thing that we need to say to ourselves is that there is what is called stewardship accountability. It is unfortunate that we are not yet operating with that phrase and frame of mind. For 32 persons on the average to be dying daily. And mind you, this figure is uniquely not fully capturing those of security and law enforcement or defense operatives.
No, these are civilian casualties.
These are civilian casualties. When you have a minimum of 17 persons kidnapped per day nationwide, we have a major crisis on our hands that we need to begin to understand that the target in the Northwest is essentially the educational institutions. Northwest is one of the zones of the Nigerian state where the admission indicators
are the lowest.
And
indirectly, the lowest.
What you're achieving with this is to discourage children, parents, guardians from sending their words to schools. Even now that you now discover that most of the affected institutions are privately owned. Based on the exigencies and implications that come from precarious liabilities.
How many individuals will be willing to set up any further schools in the entire northwestern zone?
These have a major impact on human capacity development. And once you have a reversal of the trend of human capacity development, which cometh only through education and educating people, it means that indirectly we want to slow down the rate of human capacity development. Once you have human capacity deficiencies, you are going to have education security breaches.
Yes.
Because you are no longer contributing to integrated national development. I think until state actors begin to see that we are not just dealing with a question of, say, oh, the schools that have been affected are Christian schools or Muslim schools. No. The children that have been affected are the children of the downtrodden.
Until we see that these are Nigerian children that are supposed to be in school that are not in school.
And that if the educational system were not disrupted in another 5 years, these children ought to have graduated from secondary school. They ought to have finished and become graduates. Yes, unfortunately, you have the president, the incumbent president saying, if you went to the best schools or you got the best degree, you may not get a job. If that is a kind of attitudinal disposition that we're having, I think it is now high time that those of us who are in the organized private sector, those of us who are in the other ambits of the stakeholder network of the Nigerian state must begin to see that we have a lot more to do.
Yes.
And this is where part of what we'll begin to emphasize will be, how do we strengthen, like take for instance, the open university system,
so that people can study from home, as it were.
As it were. How do we ensure that, yes, we improve the infrastructure to support online learning.
Yes.
And those are the realities.
How do we bring down data costs? How do we educate people in the villages on the use of all these devices, including the iPhone or the Android phone, in order that the times they cannot go to school, to boarding school, they can study at home and not lose any day of any day. They don't lose it from education.
Yeah. And that is where some of us will now want the National Assembly, for example, to start saying the Ministry of Communications, the National Communications Commission, you are set in your plan of activities that you are establishing rural communication centers and infrastructure.
Yes.
How viable have they turned out to be? And we will discover that...
and we are not going to reinvent the wheel in this. We are aware of the Khan Academy.
Yes, sir.
The Khan Academy that is now all over the world, where this person, this Pakistani or what, decided to take education to people in the remotest villages. And it has become a global academy where you can study from primary school to PhD, living in your home. We are not reinventing the wheel. And yet, under our present circumstance, since this crisis started a few years ago, we would have expected our ministries of communication, National Orientation Agency, and such other government outfits to have worked hard on this so that we don't continue to lose, as you say, our human capital to this menace. Look, I wanted to draw your attention to something that I received just today, that an MP, a member of parliament in the UK, stood up a few days ago to challenge Boris Johnson, the president, and say, look, I have lost an uncle, I have lost an aunt, I have lost this to COVID. It is because of your bad policies as president. And that I did not have the opportunity to be at the bedside of my sister or my uncle that died. You owe us an apology. You owe the British people an apology for all the people we lost, because if you had taken the right actions, we would not have lost those people. And I watched the Prime Minister get up and apologize profusely to the British people for whatever mistakes they made and that all the people who were lost. And he said, well, even this, my apology will not bring back the people who have died, but please accept my apology. Then I sent this to our National Confrontative Front WhatsApp. I said, look, this is some measure of servant leadership, accountability, and especially freedom of expression. Just when shall we imbibe these critical elements of the democratic culture? You see, because while all that is going on in this country, I find it very, very sad that one government official after the other calls out people who are critical of what is going on as enemies of the state. As enemies of the state. I mean, we are dying. Our relations are dying. Our children are not able to go to school. They are being kidnapped and nothing is happening. Look at Islamia school. 6 to 7 weeks now in Niger. Look at the Bethel school. Look at even Chibok girls. Some of them, Nigerians are beginning to forget. Leah Sharibu and others. Yeah. And Nigerians should be angry. Nigerians should be, I mean, we should all rise up to say, this is unacceptable. And yet, there are agents of government who think that those of us who cry out are enemies of the state.
It's so sad, but it's expected, because our political parties are just political machines for state capture. And
after capturing the state, you don't know what to do with it.
And after capturing the state, the people are no longer of any relevance, because the electoral system that they use, that we operate in the country, is just an attempt to use it to validate the process of state capture, not that the votes are really counting. Because if the votes were really counting, and you know that if you do not deliver, there are some constitutional provisions for recall, particularly for the legislative arm. And when you look at the legislature, they ought to have been holding the executive arm to account. It is wrong of any Senate, any House of Representatives of the Nigerian state to just suo motu agree that we are going to be rubber stamping anything that comes from the executive branch because you want to establish a very robust, healthy relationship. Healthy relationships must be clearly defined to include that I can be against you on grounds of principles, but that does not mean I hate you.
No.
And that participatory democracy means that you have your views that you are bringing to the table, and the views that you are bringing to the table is primarily because you are equally concerned
you are
for
patriotic.
Integrated
you love the
development.
country.
You are exhibiting your patriotism. Unfortunately, because these people do not see themselves as emerging through a process that is accountable and will have recourse to the electorate, they go ahead and say the kind of things that they say. And painfully, the spokespeople and persons that they appoint are more than toxic in their language. They are so toxic in their style of delivery to the extent that rather than see and extract data for feedback to say, well, Mr. Governor, Mr. Chairman of the local government, at the motor park yesterday, this transpired. It is simply because we introduced this policy, and this policy is not well received. We need to adjust and make the required progress.
The feelers I am getting is that these policies are not well received.
And until we start seeing that we have the measurable indicators of service delivery, for which we require to do monitoring and evaluation, for which we must have a feedback. And there are processes for all of these things as provided for in the law. When you take a look at the issue of determining the number of vehicles on Nigerian roads vis-a-vis the number of liters that we claim we consume per day, and that dovetails into what is now believed to be fuel subsidy, you will discover that there is a disconnect. All of us use vehicles.
Yes.
We know if you say we are consuming 100 million liters per day of fuel, we can simply say if you are talking only of premium spirit,
yes,
if you want to take it by 50 liters per vehicle, and you can simply do the arithmetic, and then you
come out with the fact that come on, we couldn't possibly consume all that.
We all know as car users that we do not consume up to 50 liters a day.
We're not all taxi drivers.
And even the taxi drivers that consume, you know the number on the streets. All I need to do is appreciate, and this is where it becomes very tricky, that the Nigerian state is very slippery in terms of allowing you to correlate data.
Yes.
And that is why many a times the Bureau of Statistics report, when they come out, they don't allow it to go widely. And even the ones that are posted on the website, occasionally when you want to download, it's a difficult.
Does not allow you to download.
And when you make reference to it and they say they are feeling embarrassed by it, they will be challenging the same statistics that is from the official agency of government, which brings us to the issue of, are we truly interested in development? If development is a core...
There are dimensions of the Nigerian state that each time, the more you look, the less you see. And you ask yourself whether the Nigerian state itself is a fraud. I mean, there are many people who believe that it is a fraud. And a lot of things, I mean, what you cannot measure, how can you develop? How can you make any impact if you cannot measure? If we do not know how many we are, to tell you that the Nigerian state is like a fraud, how many Nigerians are there? Some people say 200 million, some people say 210 million, some people say 206 million. Based on what? Based on contentious population figures of the past. So, in spite of your level of education and exposure, if you are asked, if you travel out of this country and you are asked how many Nigerians are there and you say 200 million, you yourself know that it's guesstimate. I know it is guesstimate. Now you are asked how much petrol, premium spirit, how much do we consume per day? If you say 1 million barrels, you yourself know that it is simply guesswork. You live in Abuja. If they ask you how many people live in Abuja, you cannot honestly say you know how many people live in Abuja. Now, this is what I mean by, to some extent, it's a fraud, because we don't have any mutually agreed data. And how do you run a society when you do not have agreeable data? When data becomes political, everything is political. How many are we? It is political. How much fuel are we consuming? It is political. So when are we going to use science? When are we going to use data? This is something that those who are going to continue to go in for politics and into policy making must take seriously. Otherwise, we're not going anywhere, are we?
We're not going anywhere. And that is why you'll discover that there is a deliberate attempt to attack people getting educated. It is ongoing.
Because education frees people now.
Yes. And that is why you realize that not only are they attacking people from getting educated by disturbing or disrupting their presence in schools, they are frustrating as many people as possible that are excited about acquiring education. I have listened to the incumbent Registrar General of JAMB, and he has tried to argue about the scores and the recent last exercise that they had and the level of pass or otherwise. And each time I listen to him and he's talking of they are using 120 marks as the basis for pass.
Out of 400.
Out of 400. I want Nigerians to simply understand that you are saying 30% is now the
pass mark.
Pass mark. And if 30% is now the pass mark, what is the quality we are going to produce in some years
because
to come?
Because the output will depend on the input.
And if painfully you are having and creating a trajectory of those who score 30% to gain admission to university from a bedrock of substructure of secondary that was based on people that had 10 marks to get into secondary school, and then you are now saying 30% at best to enter university. Yes, you can argue and explain all you care that there is a post-UTME conducted by the various universities or tertiary institutions.
Who also will have their own benchmark
that is again low. If we understand that we are not doing good service to the future of Nigeria, and mind you, again, we have lumped the technical education certification again with the university degrees.
We have literally flushed out the technical education and everybody is getting degree.
And you are now having degrees, and we will soon have a crop of Nigerians who have certificates but do not have skills.
Not functional at all.
They don't have skills. Meanwhile, the system we used to operate before, we were having those who were going to go on the technical line, the commercial line.
Yes.
They were having all they needed to have.
Yes.
So that properly. They can function properly as an organic whole.
Kunle, let's end this. What hope do you have as a peace practitioner, as a conflict management practitioner and consultant? Give us a positive word. Where are we heading for from your own perspective? So we may end on some positive note.
On the positive note, I always explain this by the fact that I enjoy going to the kitchen and to participate in preparing meals. And one that all of us are very familiar with is how to bake a cake.
Yes.
It's one of the messiest food processing that you can imagine. And we are getting to the stage where even the security and law enforcement operatives that are being used by those who have captured the states and those who consider themselves as economic and political elite of the Nigerian state, they are going to one day, and we are getting there very soon, become part and parcel of the protests against those who have captured states.
Okay, the people they use, those
to suppress and oppress
and capture the state will soon turn against those who are using them to capture the state.
And it is at that stage that we will begin to have a way forward. And I want to plead with the political and economic elite to have an informed self-preservation interest by saying, don't let it be bloody. Let all of us facilitate.
Don't go the way of Sudan. Al-Bashir Sudan. No, please.
Let us have something that is progressive, and as such, they now must begin to become responsive. They must now activate all those beautiful plans that are contained in the National Economic Recovery Plan and Growth. They must activate all the contents of the medium economic transformation plans that they have put in place, so that we can now begin to see that all these things will happen correctly, and there will be service delivery, there will be integrated development. The welfare, the security of the citizens are going to be taken seriously. Enough is enough of thinking that they can get some services elsewhere for themselves. COVID-19 and the restrictions and travel protocols have begun to show us that medical tourism is no longer going to be there for us to latch in onto. So we need to now begin to say to ourselves, how much
fix this place
does it cost to fix some of these things? And it's going to be surprising if I mention to you that to have ultrasound equipment flooding the place is so cheap. There are some ultrasound equipment that are as cheap as $200. Ultrasound. There are some ECG equipment that are as cheap as $400.
All kinds of new diagnostic equipment being manufactured in Cuba, in other places, very cheap.
We can easily bring in. And as such, those of you who have a fleet of cars at home, it's good to have a Rolls Royce. I agree with you. But we now need to start investing in all these things. And I'm beginning to see that a number of them are realizing with the COVID encounter that you can have all the money.
And you can't spend them.
You can pay the medical facility, but they may not have a bed space for you. So let us now begin to activate and do the needful.
On that note, we'll bring this discussion to an end. I've been speaking with Elder Kunle Fagbemi, Peace and Conflict Management Consultant, and we have been reflecting on what appears to be a high-intensity conflict situation in Nigeria that is ongoing. And he is hoping that those who are being used to capture the Nigerian state for now will join us to challenge those who have captured the Nigerian state to do something about it, to change, so that leadership may be for the service of the Nigerian people. Thank you. God bless you.
Thank you very much for having me, Father.